those white people who had AIDS in the 80s and early 90s, they didn't go anywhere. I mean, some of them died, but the AIDS virus didn't go anywhere. The people that they were in contact with, they were still spreading it, and they still have it. And it's still very prevalent in white society. There are celebrities now who are white and getting AIDS and dying, and you got people who are big name celebrities. Charlie Sheen, when it came out, he had HIV. It's not just Charlie Sheen. It's other people who have it, but what they do, they say it's something else, and they still hide it and put black people as the face of AIDS today.
You can get a letter from a spiritual leader that can opt you out of vaccines. But if you're going to be in that public school system, your child will be ostracized. You'll never know it. See, I was in the system, so I know. Everything that happened in the school, they always blamed the child that wasn't vaccinated. That child became a pariah in the building.
You're one of the first people to really shed light on AIDS being racialized. And one person who was talking about cures and bringing forth certain cures for AIDS was a guy named Zeers Miles, the brother from back in the 80s and early 90s. A lot of his stuff was really circulating heavy on the underground circuit of LA. And this brother mysteriously died, of course, around 1995.
Yeah, the Nation of Islam got in trouble for bringing Qumran from one of the African nations. I don't know if it was Ghana or Kenya, I believe. And they snatched it up as soon as I believe his name was Dr. Alim Muhammad. As soon as Dr. Alim Muhammad got into Atlanta, Georgia, they snatched it up. And remember, Atlanta is the headquarters of CDC. Do you remember when I said that when you deal with diseases, you're dealing with property that belongs to the government? Well, Qumran, that's a name of a drug. The name of drugs is also their property.
In the late 70s, early 80s, they had something in Atlanta called the Atlanta Child Murders, where there were dozens of black children being found dead. Many of the children were being found in the Chattahoochee River. And what was interesting about the Atlanta Child Murders is that the CDC was involved in the investigation, and that confused a lot of people. Why is the CDC involved in this investigation? There were a lot of rumors. One rumor was that the boys, there were some kind of chemicals being taken out of the testicles of the boys for some kind of research. There was a lot of rumors. But one thing we know that those bodies were found in the Chattahoochee River. What's interesting, fast forward to a couple of years ago, a CDC doctor, a black guy, he was found missing. He was missing for a long time, and they ended up finding his body in the same river, the Chattahoochee River. So it's a lot of strange stuff going on with the CDC in Atlanta and that area.
And if someone is obese, they're actually starving. Isn't that interesting? You think that they're really getting some nourishment because they got so much of the body, but actually they're starving. They keep looking for more food because there's no value in the food. It comes up zero. So that's why they'll eat and sleep.
Processed food is when you take one substance out of a plant and you just eat that. So you have a wheat berry, which has vitamin E and oils in it and water and minerals in it. And instead of taking the whole plant, you just take the starch out of the wheat berry and trash the rest of it and sell wheat germ, oil, and all that stuff. So once you take that substance out, by definition, it's called a drug. When you isolate something from a plant, you isolate the cocaine from the cocoa leaf, you got a drug. You isolate the heroin from a poppy seed, you got a drug. When you isolate the starch from a wheat berry, you got a drug. So we're calling this thing a food when it's actually a drug.
Sugar and salt, they react with the same part of the brain as crack cocaine does to stimulate hunger, to stimulate excitement, to stimulate anger, all of these different things. So they put that in the fries, they put that in the burgers. The burgers are mixed with slime and other chemicals.
Right now, we could drink strawberry soda, artificially flavored, and we read the ingredients on the can. We're not gonna find strawberries as an ingredient, but it smells like strawberry and it tastes like strawberry. Why? The chemicals. The chemical capital is in New Jersey. Chemicals for your ice cream, for your burgers, your cakes, for everything. These people can take those chemicals and put it in dog manure and make it taste like chicken McNuggets.
A lot of the processed foods, that's an oxymoron. This sliced 100% turkey breast that you're getting, Well, okay, what does turkey look like? It's dry. It's a dry food. You can't wiggle it like this on a slice. Okay, that's ridiculous. It's usually, at that point, it's 3% meat. And they say 100% turkey breast, they're talking about the 3%.
Our body frequency and the sunlight is really one. It's in one alignment. So when people want to get charged, when they want inspiration, when they want to learn the latest dance song, whatever the creative energy that we have, they plug into us. They don't necessarily give us back in kind. It's a lot of stealing and taking away, but we have that ability to charge any and everything with our thoughts, with a touch. That's why so many babies are raised, on a plantation. Who's raising them? Black mothers.
You get sick eating processed foods. Processed foods have to be preserved, and you only preserve that which is dead.
The average woman is hemorrhaging. She doesn't know she's hemorrhaging. The average woman is bleeding 5, 6, 7, 8 days. That is hemorrhaging. We really just no more than 1, 2, or 3 days tops, and maybe a few drops of blood, if that much, because when you lose that blood, it's coming out of the brain. And that's how come we become hysterical, mood swings, angry, hostile. They find that there's more women that went into prison during the time of their menstrual flow. That's when they're most violent to themselves and to their family.
White women, their uterus, the reproductive organ with which to house a newborn or a child or a fetus, their bodies are not able to hold them as much as the original black and brown women. So now they're getting transplants, these uteral transplants, while black women are encouraged to get hysterectomies.
You can't even say, hey, listen, drink carrot juice. Carrot juice will cure you of cancer. The FDA will send you a letter and tell you you're using carrot juice in a way that makes carrot juice a drug. And that drug has not been tested.
Because sugar's a few molecules away from crack and cocaine, and everybody's addicted. It's a legal drug, so it looks normal. And so it's the same thing as snorting it up. Because sugar eats away at the brain, so we become senile at a young age, forgetful. It eats away at the nervous system, so we get traumatized, we get stressed out, we can get violent just after having a few donuts and a soda and some coffee with some sugar.
Crack was used on monkeys 13 years at least before Freeway Rick got his hands on it, before the CIA was pushing him to make the money to give back to Ronald Reagan to fight the Contras in Nicaragua because Congress wasn't giving him the approved amount of funds he needed.
In the 1960s and 70s here in Los Angeles, the guy, the hustler, the dude who was the man in LA was Tootie Reese. Now, Tootie Reese was the predecessor to Freeway Rick. In fact, he was Freeway Rick's idol. Freeway Rick loved him, and he patterned himself after Tootie Reese. Tootie Reese went up to the Bay Area, and he got with some people up there, and up in Oakland, crack was already circulating, or freebase was already circulating. There was a book out of Oakland that was published there called The Pleasures of Cocaine in 1976. This book actually had the formula on how to make crack. They didn't call it that at the time. They had different formulas of how to freebase cocaine. One formula was using ether. Another formula was using baking soda. So the concoction of using baking soda to rock up cocaine came from this one particular book in 1976 that was published in Oakland.
Well, when I started selling drugs, there was this guy that everybody used to talk about, Tootie Reese, Tootie Reese, Tootie Reese. I had a glance a couple times of him passing by in his Porsche. I think I heard about Tootie almost instantly after I got in the business. He was definitely a legend in those circles, and it couldn't have been more than a year, 6 months of me being in the business that I started to hear about this guy named Tootie Reese that owned everything.
So when Tootie Reese came down here, many people believe that he brought that formula with him, and then it circulated on the streets of LA, and then later on, Freeway Rick and other street dudes got that formula, and after Tootie Reese got locked up in the early 80s, that's when Freeway Rick became the guy out here.
People would come by, and they would be like, in the mornings, like before work, and they'd be like, wow, I want to get high, I ain't got no utensils, I ain't got no way to cook it up. And we started having utensils around for them to cook it, and then eventually we started cooking it up, and we started calling it Ready Rocked. So that way that they could just put it right on the pipe, hit it, and then go on to work, and wouldn't have to worry about cooking it up for themselves.
When crack came along, all the homies was basing. Now they was basing like Richard Pryor based. That's when you take the ether and you put it in a little dish and you swirl it around. It makes these crystallized trees and you scrape it off and you put it in the pipe and it screams.
There was a rumor that Richard Pryor's dealer was Tootie Reese. Many people believe that Tootie Reese was Richard Pryor's dealer. He was the one who sold him the freebase that Richard would use. In 1980, I think it was, Richard Pryor, he burned himself up ether basing. He was using ether trying to rock up the cocaine, and ether is very dangerous. So that's how Richard Pryor, he blew himself up, burned himself up. It was all over the news. Then people were talking about freebase. Freebase was being talked about in the mainstream media. So drug dealers who were using ether base or selling ether base, it became hot for them. So they had to change that formula. They had to use the baking soda formula. And the baking soda formula of making rock cocaine, it was cheaper, so more people could get it, and it spread faster. So that was the correlation.
And I never was a good drug dealer. When I tried to be a drug dealer, I bought a key of cocaine. I gave it out to everybody to sell, and everyone came back short. Everybody. Everybody had a story, this, that, and other. Now I'm like, when I'm reading this code book we were talking about, I'm supposed to kill you. I'm supposed to torture you. I'm supposed to shoot you.
When I started, they were still ether basing when I first started, but there were guys that were starting to cook it with baking soda. The guy who first turned me on is a guy by the name of Stefan Moore, rest in peace. He was the first one that started to teach me how to cook it with baking soda.
So the legal drugs that are being used are all in the inner cities. You have all of the pharmaceutical agencies dishing out tons of drugs for free, some of them. They even pay you to take these drugs, these legal pharmaceutical drugs, and they call it a crazy check when you get paid to take these drugs.
My supplier was an operative for the CIA, Danilo Blandone. Gary Webb had been following Danilo around, trying to figure out his connections to the CIA and the Contras. Gary found me when I was downtown San Diego MCC, fighting my case, and he came in and said that he had information that he could offer us.
Gary Webb was a journalist who was very instrumental in the Freeway Rick case, the Freeway Rick story. He exposed a lot of the government's involvement with bringing cocaine and putting it on the streets of LA. So he exposed a lot of things. And as a white person, you're not supposed to do that. That's getting off code. And it's not surprising that Gary Webb ended up dead. And they said that he committed suicide. But Gary Webb had 2 gunshots to his head. And they said he shot himself in the head twice. How do you do that?
Pedophilia. They have to normalize everything that is in their actual culture. Their actual culture. Now, I know some people might be offended by this, but pedophilia had nothing to do with the origins in Africa. It had nothing to do with Asia entirely. It had nothing to do with the origins of us as a natural, original people.
In a lot of schools that they have to teach about that and letting the children talking about their transgender. Now, you know, when you're that little, when you're 5 and 6 and 7 years old, children don't know anything about sex unless they've been molested or exposed to it some kind of way. And they still don't know what to call it then, okay, if they've been traumatized or something like that. But the way it's set up now, they have laws where they have to teach that. Bobby has 2 daddies, you know. Millie has 2 mommies. They're teaching all of this stuff and putting it in our children's head, who are very imaginative.
And then we saw a movement that wants to now legalize the raping of children, the molestation of the children, of physical and psychological abuse of the children being the law in the land. What is it that we're dealing with? What level of animals are we dealing with?
It's happening once again from the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, queer. Now they're pushing pedophilia, but they're switching it because we know pedophilia is not accepted in civilized society, right? So what do? Well, since everybody's getting their own sexual orientation, hell, we might as well get our own. So according to the American Psychiatric Association, they have petitioned to switch pedophilia and to give it its own sexual orientation like lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, queer, and straight. And so they're switching it into something called pedosexual.